Thank you, Mr. President, and good evening, I guess, colleagues. It's 5:30 now. So this is an amendment to strike Section 1. There's been a lot of questions and a lot of people kind of flitting about wondering what's going on, and, dropped this amendment because I wanted to make sure we had an opportunity to talk. We've heard a lot of people get up so far and talk about how this is about fairness, and how this is about equity, and how this is about protecting people. In my opinion, colleagues, this bill is about the exact opposite. We heard earlier on the mic somebody say this bill is not about discrimination. Well, whether you like it or not, this bill literally discriminates. It picks one group of people and it treats them differently than another. And if I have the time later, you'll get to hear me talk a little bit more about what discrimination is allowed and what's not allowed under different levels of scrutiny. But at the end of the day, you don't get to put your head in the sand and pretend like this isn't discrimination. It is. And you have to be comfortable with that. If you're voting for this, you just have to be comfortable that you are deciding to treat one class of people differently than another. And the question that you have to ask yourself is, do I think the reason we're doing it is good enough? And that is ultimately where the courts will get involved. But before we even get into any of that, we also heard earlier that this is not political, that nobody's trying to make a political statement. Well, there's a phrase that second-wave feminism made popular back in the late 1960s, which is that the personal is political. You may have heard that. The personal is political. And what that means is that people's everyday lives are inherently political. The social decisions they make, the political decisions that we make, they're all intertwined. And if you want to pretend like the decisions that we're making here today are not personal, it's incorrect. They're absolutely personal decisions, and they are political decisions that we are making. You are picking a side. So I just want to make that incredibly clear. The people that are opposed to LB89, many of which are here today, they're in the rotunda, they're up in the balcony. I can't see them, but they're up in the balcony above me over here. They will tell you, if you ask each and every one of them, what the actual ramification of this bill is to them. It's not academic. It's not just on a piece of paper. It's not about an article you read in the New York Post about a competition that happened somewhere in California that doesn't even affect you. It's about people's lives. I've had the opportunity, the honor, I'll say, to sit down with family members of people and individuals who are trans. And I've asked about these bills, and I've said to them, listen, I'm genuinely curious. How has your life changed since LB574 was passed? How do you anticipate your life to change with LB89? And each and every one of them has given me the honor of them sharing their personal stories with me. And it's incredibly heart-wrenching, colleagues. I've talked to young teenagers who have talked about wanting to leave Nebraska because they don't feel welcome. And I've talked to young teenagers who have said to me, I love Nebraska. I love Lincoln. I want to stay here, but I don't think I can because I don't feel like I'm welcome in the state. And so whether or not that's your intention, whether that's how you feel, you can sit up here and you can say, I don't want anybody to feel like this is, I'm not trying to be mean, but it has that impact. And in politics, it's a dialogue, right? We make decisions that have an impact on other people, and regardless of your intent, the impact is what matters when we talk to people. And so there are any number of reasons that LB89 is problematic, but I want to be very clear. The very conversation that we're having is part of the issue, because people have to listen to us debate their humanity. And people have to listen to us bicker back and forth about whether or not we think they deserve protections. And so, colleagues, it is very clear to me that this is a political stand. This is a political issue. And for those who are arguing that it's common sense, I would tell you that the people on the other side think it's common sense to just let people live. What's more Nebraskan than staying out of other people's businesses, right? We hear that all the time. Instead of occupying our time with trying to come up with new ideas to make home ownership easier, instead of occupying our time with trying to come up with ways to make property taxes lower, or instead of occupying our time with trying to make it a little bit easier to get access to health care, we spend our time on this. It's day 79, colleagues. We are very short on time, and yet we continue to debate these issues. And I will tell you, It's very disappointing. And to those who are watching at home, to those who are here today, I will say yet again, we love you. We care about you. We hear you. We see your stories. We understand your backgrounds. And I'm sorry that you have to keep having these conversations amongst your community. And I'm sorry that people have to keep hearing us talk about these things and be dismissive and be harmful. Because that's what it is. So, colleagues, I start with that because I do think it's important to situate where we are. And I understand there's not been a lot of pushback today yet on LB89 for various reasons, and I think people were kind of getting in a rhythm there and getting in a flow of talking about how fun this bill is and how easy it is, and we're just doing this little thing and it's super simple, when in reality, no, colleagues, this is a huge deal. So I dropped this amendment because I maybe wanted to get up and remind people that this is a little bit of a big deal. And it is something that's important and heavy, and it should be hard. I've heard a lot about sports, and I understand with the amendment we're talking more about sports than other things. I would segue, I guess, from that conversation into what the intent of this bill actually is. I have questions about implementation, I have questions about enforcement, but above all else, I have the same question that a court is going to have when they analyze whether or not we have the right as a state to discriminate based on gender, which is what this is. This is discrimination based on gender. You're saying that a person is not adhering to their gender norms, and therefore this is a discrimination based on gender, which means it has to survive intermediate scrutiny in the Supreme Court. In order for it to survive intermediate scrutiny, it needs to have an important governmental interest and a substantial relationship between that important governmental interest and the discrimination that we've enacted. Colleagues, I would posit to you that this government, that we, the state legislature, do not have an important governmental interest in making sure that somebody gets a certain place in a sporting event. Women's sports are great. Women's sports are an essential part of the fabric of Nebraska, and women's sports exist, even if trans women are participating in them. Nobody is being deprived access to sports. Nobody is being deprived access to participating on a women's team. It is not an important governmental interest in the eyes of this legislature or the court in order to say somebody should be fifth instead of sixth. Take, for example, the hypothetical that was posited, and I think it was an Ohio case recently, about a very similar law that was enjoined. They talk in that hypothetical about how if there's a young woman, seventh grader, let's say, who's participating in track the entire year, and her scores or her times throughout the entire year estimate that she would end the season ranked 15th. And then a new person moves to town, a young woman, seventh grade. She then starts participating in track. Towards the end of the season, she starts doing a little bit better than our first friend, and now the first girl's scores make it so she's projected to finish 16th. Would that give you the reason to utilize otherwise unconstitutional discrimination? No. That is not a good enough reason to discriminate based on who somebody is or where they are. Would you be able to discriminate based on any of the other unconstitutional categories simply because you wanted to make sure girl A got 15th instead of 16th? Of course not. That's preposterous. So if in fact your goal is to ensure the placement of individuals in women's sports, I would argue to you, as I believe any court would, that that is not a good enough reason to literally legislate discrimination. If, however, your goal is to simply discriminate based on the fact that somebody is trans and that you are afraid of them or you think that they're going to cause problems, that is not a valid form of discrimination. And I cannot think of any important governmental interest that would rise to the level of validating otherwise unconstitutional discrimination in that context. Women's sports are not in threat. Women's sports are thriving in the state of Nebraska, and LB89 does nothing to protect the entirety of women's sports. What it does is it seeks to tell people in our community that they are different, that they are worse, and that they are scary, when we know for a fact, if you take even 10 seconds to meet with these kids, to meet with their families, that they're none of those things. They are just like you. And all they're asking, frankly, colleagues, is to be left alone. We don't have to legislate based on them. We just got to shut up. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Doran, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in support of LB89 and against FA 239. One of the comments I'll make is that I enjoyed listening to the comments today, all the discussion. Part of what I remember coming up here 6 years ago or 7 years ago, this probably wasn't, I call it a topic that